Good morning. It's Sunday, November 27.
Compass Community Church, exploring faith together. Compass Community Church, exploring faith together.
I'm starting a new series of messages today that will lead us right up to Christmas. Christians don't rush too quickly to Christmas. We want to take our time in this season of Advent, thinking about who Jesus is and what his birth really means. And we're going to be exploring something called the 5 love languages. Have you ever heard that phrase? Are you familiar with that book? The 5 love languages identifies 5 key ways that we understand, express, and receive the power of love. We're going to get into that this morning and for the next number of weeks. But before we do, here's a musical offering from our praise team.
I believe you gave sight to the blind. I believe that the dead came to life. I believe there were wonders and signs, and you're still the same. I believe every word that you said. I believe there are scars in your hands, that your goodness is good without end, and you'll never change. I will tell of your wonders, sing of your grace. The God of creation knows me by name. The Lord is faithful, yesterday, now, and always, always. Your mercy is mighty, age after age, and all generations will bow down and praise. The Lord is faithful, yesterday, now, and always, always. I believe you will come in the clouds. I believe you are here even now. In your presence I know there is power, power to save. Oh.
So, the 5 love languages. Written by a counselor, Gary Chapman, an enormously popular book written 30 years ago now. It's sold millions of copies. In the book, Gary Chapman enables us to experience how we all have our own unique language when it comes to love, how we are all uniquely emotionally wired. He has been a counselor for many years and has helped people understand what love is all about, how we communicate love, what our own expectations about love look like, and how we need to understand how friends and family members are wired emotionally so that the kind of love they need and which we want to give them enriches them, blesses them, just as they do for us. So the 5 love languages are broken down into 5 unique categories, and every one of us is strong in one of these 5 love languages. It's the language of love that we speak and understand. And we're going to start this morning with words of affirmation. It's a kind of language. It's a way of expressing, receiving love. Words of affirmation. And we're doing this in this series of Advent, these 4 Sundays that lead up to Christmas, because our ultimate purpose is to see how Jesus Christ fully embodies each of these 5 love languages. He is the perfection of love, the greatest embodiment and power of God at work when it comes to showing the world the love of God. I'm sure you're familiar with the words John 3 verse 16, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son." And that's what Christmas is all about. And when we think about the love of God shown to the world in Jesus Christ, we're going to see how he perfectly embodies and shows each of those 5 love languages. So the language today is words of affirmation. And we're going to be reading a gospel reading today and in every week that illustrates how Jesus perfectly embodies and speaks that specific kind of love language. And since we're thinking about words of affirmation today, We're going to hear these words recorded in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 8, verses 5 through 13. When Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him asking for help. "Lord," he said, "my servant lies at home paralyzed, suffering terribly." Jesus said to him, "I will go and heal him." The centurion replied, "Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority with soldiers under me. I tell this one, 'Go,' and he goes, and that one, 'Come,' and he comes. I say to my servant, 'Do this,' and he does it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed and said to those following him, "Truly I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. I say to you that many will come from the east and the west and will take their places at the feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the subjects of the kingdom will be thrown outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Then Jesus said to the centurion, "Go, it will be done for you just as you believed it would." And his servant was healed at that moment. I think this passage really helps us understand what words of affirmation are all about. Let's begin by just acknowledging the power that words have. Words are powerful weapons, either for good or for evil. Words are not just statements, they're not just sounds. Words create things, they shape realities, they forge and sustain all relationships. In the Old Testament language of Hebrew, the word for word is dabar. It means word, but it can also mean event or action. Words don't just exist, they create. You're probably familiar with the old nursery rhyme, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me." That's just not true. Sticks and stones also hurt us, but words also do. Words can damage a person's reputation. They can have a negative impact on our sense of identity, our sense of self-worth. Words are incredibly powerful, and words do hurt, sometimes even more than physical injuries hurt. I'm sure you've felt the impact of words spoken to you or about you, the good impact or the negative impact of words spoken to you or about you. Words bless, words encourage, but words also destroy and break down. Emily Dickinson once said that a word is dead when it is said. Some say, I say it just begins to live that day. That's just one testimony, a brief poem to the power of words. Once they're spoken, they continue to live and shape and create. Have you ever said something that you regret? We all have. It's almost as if no sooner are the words out of our mouth and we wish that we could catch them out of the air and gather them all up and bring them back in. And of course we can't. The words are out there. You can't bring them back again. And the impact of our words, when they're negative words, can never fully be undone. It's why the Bible addresses how we speak so often. We find this especially in the Old Testament book of Proverbs that talks about the tongue, speaking, knowing when to speak and when to be silent, and choosing to speak well, to be discerning in the way we speak. Now, the love language called words of affirmation helps us to recognize and actually experience the creative power of words for good purposes. Words of affirmation are words of love, words of blessing, words that breathe life into relationships. In the book, Gary Chapman identifies 3 specific ways that we express and receive the blessing of affirming words. Here's the first context where words of affirmation flourish and thrive. It's when we speak to someone we love and when they speak to us. It's a very tender, personal, intimate conversation, typically between a husband and a wife, a parent and a child, one close friend speaking with another. These words of affirmation spoken privately, just between two, create and sustain love. An example I heard years ago really bears this out. It's taken from a book called The Whisper Test. written by a woman named Mary Ann Bird. When she was a little girl, as she writes in this book, I grew up knowing that I was different and I hated it. I was born with a cleft palate, and when I started school, my classmates made it clear to me how I looked to others. A little girl with a misshapen lip, a crooked nose, lopsided teeth, and garbled speech. They mocked her. They hurt her with their words. But there was a teacher in the second grade that everyone adored. Mrs. Leonard was her name. She was short, round, happy, a sparkling lady. And every year, the children in the class would have a hearing test, and it would go like this. Mrs. Leonard would call the children up to her desk one by one. They would stand a little bit away from where she was seated at her desk, and she would whisper words to them. That's why this book is called The Whisper Test. The test was they had to repeat the words that the teacher whispered to them. That was how the teacher could test their hearing. And so the teacher would say things like, "The sky is blue," or "Do you have new shoes?" And when Mary Ann Bird was up front with this teacher, a beautiful soul who understood this little girl's disabilities, she waited for the words that the teacher spoke to her. And here's the words that she whispered. As she puts it, I waited for those words that God put into her mouth, those 7 words that changed my life. Mrs. Leonard said in her whisper, "I wish you were my little girl." Words that took very little time to be spoken, but words that created and shaped new life and blessing. As Mary Ann Bird puts it in her explanation of what happened that day and how it continued to reap a great blessing in her life for years and years later, love confers a kind of chosenness on the one who is loved. Love whispers, "I choose you, I love you, I want to be on your side." And for a ragged little girl, for people with misshapen spirits and crooked hearts and lopsided souls, this is life. So speak those words to each other. To your spouse, to your children, to your sibling, to your friend, speak them. And know that in those words of affirmation, you are creating new realities, just as those who speak those words, those tender words of love to you, accomplish in your life. There's a second context where words of affirmation have creative and powerful impact. It's words that are spoken when we acknowledge someone. It's not just that you're speaking to someone or they are speaking to you. You are acknowledging someone or commending someone to someone else, and you hear it. Think of speeches, for instance, when somebody has won an award or has accomplished something incredible. Very often they will thank the people who helped make that become a reality. And so they thank their parents who sacrificed for them, or friends and family members who encouraged them all along the way. This is another way that words of affirmation have creative power. And most of the time, the words spoken by someone who has won an award or made some kind of an accomplishment are addressed to people, or people who are referred to in these words are actually present there. And it can be a little embarrassing sometimes. Also in the way it happens when somebody you know introduces you to someone you don't know. Sometimes they don't just mention your name, but they say a little bit more about you, the kind of person you are. I remember this happening to me once some years ago when someone I admired introduced me to someone I didn't know, and she said beautiful things about me. I was embarrassed. I could feel my cheeks getting warm and flushed. But what a blessing it was to hear those words that acknowledged and blessed me. This is what Jesus does in the gospel reading that I read earlier. He speaks glowing words about this Roman officer's faith. He speaks publicly about him, saying that he hasn't found anyone in Israel with faith that came close to the faith of this Roman centurion, a Gentile, someone who was despised, an oppressor. Jesus commended him, publicly acknowledging him. So Jesus here embodies this particular love language. And there's another way, there's an even greater way that he does that, and I'll get at that in a moment. But before I do, there's a third context where words of affirmation have creative power. It's not just in one-to-one conversation that we have with people or words that others speak about us when we're present. You can probably guess what this third context is. It's a word that we speak about someone or that someone speaks about us when that person is not present. This is such an important discipline. How do you talk to people? How do you tend to talk to people about others when they're not around? I'm thinking especially about people that you find hard to like, people who have hurt you, people that you have a hard time getting along with. How do you tend to talk about them to someone else when they're not there? This is a very important point, and it has to do with how words of affirmation create new and beautiful things. You know, when somebody passes away, there's often a eulogy that's spoken at the funeral or memorial service. But it's important to eulogize people long before they're gone. Eulogy literally means good word. We need to say good words about people, especially when they're not present, so that their character is respected. There's no malice, there's no slander, there's no intent to hurt someone or gossip about them. You make them look good. It's so important that we do that. I remember in the former church I pastored, there was an older associate pastor who was seasoned and kind and faithful, and he said to me soon after I arrived in this church, "I'm going to be talking a lot about you behind your back." Now that doesn't sound very good, does it? Usually when you talk about someone behind their back, there's something malicious about that. But he meant that he would talk about me a lot with other people in good, constructive, positive ways. Words of affirmation that bless, that create life. Now, Jesus is the fullest and most powerful embodiment of this. He is the embodiment of this love language in the words he speaks. He not only speaks powerful, beautiful, holy words, he is himself the Word of God that speaks grace, forgiveness, and love into our lives. In the prologue to John's Gospel, chapter 1, Jesus is referred to as the one who has made the Father known. He explains the Father to us. And that's what Christmas is all about. That baby born in Bethlehem is the one who helps us understand in the love language of affirmation who God is, how much he loves us, how much he accepts us. It's what we at Compass Community Church want to let others know about, which is why if you're wondering about who Jesus is and what following Jesus might look like in your life, we hope that you contact us. We hope that you email us. The email that you can contact us is office@compasschurchstrathroy.ca. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to answer any question you have about who Jesus is and what Christmas is all about and what the words of affirmation that Jesus speaks into our lives can mean for you. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope it's helped you understand the language of love, God's love, a little bit more clearly, so that we can also speak these words of affirmation and love that bless the lives of others. Thanks so much for watching. Be well and be blessed.
Compass Community Church.